Hi, I want to welcome you to the next project conversation. We are fully at episode number 18. Right now, I have somebody that I feel is a gift right now. His name is Joshua Bennett. He is the voice of a generation. Sometimes you don't realize how gifted somebody is until you start hearing about other people talking to him. I've known Josh almost 20 years now, and every time I mention his name to people in this generation, they go, it's almost with reference Joshua Bennett. He gets us and he could write it. As we go through these seasons of revolution and protests on the streets, we need many different elements. We need those that march, we need those that organize, but like a James Baldwin, we need somebody that can write down the struggles of a generation in such clarity, and I believe Joshua Bennett is that person. Dr. Joshua Bennett, how are you doing, sir?
I'm well, brother. It's good to see you.
It's so good to see you. I just want to talk to you a little bit and about where we are today as a people, how we're recording our voice, how we're speaking into life. Can you tell us a little bit about how the coronavirus plus the current uprising on the streets have impacted your writing, your thinking, your perspective?
Uh, yeah, for sure. Well, first and foremost, I mean, my grandmother passed away at the beginning of the pandemic. And so not being able to attend her funeral in person and having to actually see it via Zoom first, and then that shut down, and then having to move over to my cousin's Facebook Live to watch my grandmother's funeral really framed the entire moment for me. It wasn't just about sort of the discomfort of having to stay at home or not being able to travel the way I wanted to, but really having to think about the life and death stakes of it, especially for our folks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. That was
Okay.
not fair.
So that was a big part of it for me, was seeing that, experiencing that, and losing her. But then even beyond that, really, it's changed the way I think about what my writing is for, who I want my writing to reach, especially thinking now about the protests in the wake of the state-sanctioned killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. I've really been thinking about what it means to give a language to this sense that we're just watching our people die on loop, you know, both on these literal loops, right? These timelines on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, these sort of algorithm-driven platforms where you're seeing courses over and over again, but also in the historical sense, thinking about Ferguson and the echoes of that we see now. And really just trying to remain vigilant, given that we've been here before, over and over again throughout the 20th century and the 21st century, and we need each other. And it's important, as you said earlier, that artists, activists, writers aren't necessarily operating on one accord, but at least that we're in communication and are thinking about what sort of new language we can produce for this moment and for the future.
Well, you've just finished a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And if you had to rewrite the book, how would you switch it up, right? Like,
Mm,
because you got to tell the people the title and the context of the book because it's almost prophetic, the title.
yeah. So my newest book out is called Being Property Once Myself, Blackness and the End of Man. That's out with Harvard University Press. And the context of the book is honestly thinking about my grandmother. I mean, she was a sharecropper. That's how she met my grandfather when she was a teenage girl in a strawberry field in Wilmington, North Carolina. And so that was my frame before I went to graduate school for thinking about what Black people's relationship was to the environment, to the non-human world. And so part of what I'm really trying to think about in this book is how have Black people historically described their relationship to non-human forms of life, particularly to plants and animals, right? Being property once myself is a line from a poem by a poet named Lucille Clifton. And she writes, being property once myself, I have a feeling for it. That's why I can write about environment. And so for me, I've been trying to think about what is that feeling, right? For these people that have been historically not just compared, right, through racist tropes to animals, but really lived and worked alongside animals, for centuries. How have we written about that experience? And how have we written about a vision of humanity that is not predicated upon domination, right? It's not predicated upon dominion or denigrating what you perceive to be a lesser form of life. For those of us who are likewise said to have no imagination, no potential for love, no soul, what have we cultivated? What kind of ethics? What kind of poetics? So that's what that first book is really delving into. I'm looking at writers like Richard Wright, Zora Hurston, Toni Morrison, Jesmyn Ward, Robert Hayden, looking at these poets and novelists who I think have really forged a new way for us to approach how we think about that history.
Wow. One of the things you've always said. So now, if you had to write the book again today,
Yeah.
or if you were writing a book today and you're seeing all that you're seeing now, how would you deal with environment and the black soul in this moment?
Mm. I mean, well, I am writing new books actually as we speak. So
You're a writer, right?
thankfully, that first book is actually part of a trilogy, right? Where I'm
Okay.
thinking about the Black environmental imagination. So the first book is on Blackness in the animal kingdom. The second is Blackness in the mineral kingdom. The last is on Blackness in plant life. So thinking about that second book, actually, on Blackness in the earth, right?
Right.
I've been thinking about it through the lens of apocalypse, right? Which in our
Mm.
tradition is not just the end of the world, right? But the etymology of it is an opening, right? The Greek
Mm-hmm.
etymology, like an apocalypse is also an opportunity, right? It's something
Wow.
ending with something new beginning. And so in our moment, I'm thinking not just about sort of buildings that are burning down, right? But like Robbie Kelly says, what can we build on the ashes of a nightmare, right? I'm really trying to think about what have Black people always built from the destruction, not of sort of public property alone, but the fact that the destruction of that property is intimately connected, I think, to what we are owed, to what we've never been paid, right? Life that is taken away, right? Not just sort of buildings or objects or items, but what does it mean to have an entire captive population who was once property themselves and it still exists within the tendrils of that relation, right? Are treated still as property by other people, right? And so I've been trying to think about that anguish, but also that hope, that striving, that meditative tenacity, right? That brilliance under pressure. So in my new books, I'm really trying to capture that radical spirit. I'm also becoming a father, so I'm writing a series of poems called Dad Poems, which are about the experience of my partner's pregnancy during this time in the midst of a pandemic, but also us getting ready to bring a Black son into the world as we see consistently the particular sort of pressures that are placed onto Black parents, Black children in an anti-Black world, right? All of us were somebody's baby, you know? That's that human position we all carry. We were all babies, we were all children. And so I've been trying to think too about anti-Black racism as a reproductive justice issue, and really trying to just map out in my poems what it feels like to go through that experience and what kind of world I want to map out for my child before he gets here.
Wow. You know, you and I had a conversation the other night, and you said something that was so profoundly rich to me. You said, we feel like a generation's missing the poetic heritage by missing pieces of the church and missing the interaction with pastors and missing the interaction with our classic literary heroes. Can you talk a little bit about how did preachers and pastors and church influence you as a poet, and how do you see the or as Twitter culture is stealing away our literary heritage?
Well, I don't think Twitter's necessarily feeling anything so much as someone who himself left the church at a certain point in my late 20s and has gone back and sort of been in the midst of that kind of transition for a long time, just trying to figure it out what my relationship to the church would be. What I've never been able to shake is the fact that the first poets I ever saw were preachers, that my style as a spoken word poet and my style as a literary scholar, I was in the first instance framed by the Black preachers I saw. They were the first literary critics I ever saw. They were some of the most brilliant improvisation artists I saw. But above and beyond any of that, the fact was that the performance was tied ostensibly to the wellness of everyday people, right? So when my mother would hear a sermon that resonated with her, she would say, "That's my word for the week," right? She would say, "That's something I carry with me every day, no matter the ways that the world tries to denigrate me, tells me I'm not a human being, not a person, that I have no value, no beauty. I have this language that I carry around with me. And I go back every Sunday, Wednesday for Bible study, right? And I get recharged, I get revivified." And so quite often in my teaching, but also just in my practice as a poet, I'm always trying to think with my students, with colleagues about the ways that reproduce social space and how we need to renew our habits of gathering, right? Like the Black church was a restorative space for me. And I know that there are also clearly violences in that space that we have to think about, have to contend with, right? Of course, any institution, I think, has those elements to it. But for me, I have to take seriously the history of our country, right? And the fact of the matter is that Black preachers were some of our first poets, from the plantation forward. They were from some of our first educators, some of our first political leaders. And so part of what I'm really trying to think about are how do I take up that tradition for myself as someone who is not a minister, but someone who does think of poetry as my ministry. I think about it as part of my calling, even as kingdom work. Like part of why I'm here in this, I think, is to try to speak a language that hopefully sets the captives free, as it were, and speak a spirit of liberation and peace. Because that was what really resonated with me, even as a young boy, the idea that wherever the spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. That's a certain kind of political call for us, right?
Yes.
That's a responsibility.
I think people don't know your full history. Can you tell us a little bit,
Sure.
starting Yonkers, you know, the the contrast to Rye, then going to Penn, then Strivers Row, and then speaking to presidents and world officials, and how you've evolved. Because I think you are like really a role model for
Oh,
how the excellence of the Black mind can take you to some interesting places.
well, I'm honored by that. Man, where to start? I guess I can start where I was born uptown. I was
Born
raised
uptown.
in the Bronx. Moved to Yonkers, New York. Shout out to Jada Kiss, Ella Fitzgerald, Styles P, DMX. Grew up about 10, 15 minutes from DMX,
Yeah.
from his neighborhood. And I say Mary J. Blige. I shouted her out.
No, no,
Right?
you didn't. You
And then,
didn't. You got
okay,
it.
that's
Shout. Yeah.
important because she's in that Yonkers tradition. That's School Street.
Yeah.
And so for me, I don't know. I mean, it was always part of my thinking. The fact that Black people were beautiful and brilliant, even when they were living under incredible duress. Right. So I went to Yonkers public schools up until I was about 14 years old. Got an academic scholarship to go to Rye Country Day School. And even though now, as far as I know, they have a busing program that picks students up and brings them to campus, or I think they also have a car service that works sometimes. I was taking 2 buses and a train, I think, every day. So it took me about 2 hours to get to school every single day. I would wake up around 5 o'clock in the morning. And yeah, man, it was a struggle, but I got through it, thankfully, by the grace of God, man. There's actually, well, do I want to say this? It's fine. We're on Facebook Live. Let's let it out. Yeah. So apparently, there's a award named after me in my school now, and I just found this out because I got an email from a student that told me that she'd won it. I wanted to just ask more about what I was up to.
I was at your graduation. You were a big deal at that school.
That's very generous. No, it was cool. I had a good experience at Riot. It was very complicated, because they
Yeah,
just
it
didn't
was.
have that many Black students, and we had to break a lot of ground there in terms of how they were thinking about race at the administrative level. What were the sort of institutional conversations they were willing to have, not just about a kind of diversity and inclusion vision where you have Black and brown people in the space, but what kind of curricular changes are you making so that we can see ourselves reflected in the material, right? This is part of what Carter G. Woodson says. He says there would be no lynching if it did not begin in the schoolroom, right? Because part of the problem with the American school from its very foundations is that it feeds us an image that's fundamentally anti-Black, right? Black students not only don't see themselves, but the images they do receive of themselves are fundamentally negative when they are present at all. So got through that experience, went to Penn, largely for 2 reasons. One, because I found out they had this incredible spoken word group called the Excellent Project. I found them on MySpace, and this is when MySpace was popping. So I just
Yeah, it
listened
was, it
to
was
a bunch of
major
poems.
then, and we had sidekicks too.
We did have sidekick. I don't think I had a sidekick though. I had the Nokia brick.
John had a sidekick.
Okay, he was lit. I had a
Yeah.
Nokia brick. Yes, I
Okay.
did not have a sidekick.
Okay.
But it's fine. It's fine. Shout out to mom and dad. They wanted to keep me focused on the book, so I had a Nokia brick. And I found these poets on MySpace, and then I visited Penn, and I went to this house party that was incredible. So we got to remember, for the past 4 years, I've been in a private school 2 hours away from the city. It's not a lot of parties there. I went to this house party. It was amazing. So I signed up. I applied early decision and got into Penn. Ended up joining the External Project my freshman year. That same year, I was also admitted to this program called the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, which is for undergraduate students who want to pursue a PhD eventually. So there, quite early, as an 18-year-old boy, I was finding, I think, these inextricable passions, right? Both through spoken word performance, but also scholarship. So after my time at Penn, I graduated 10 years ago.
Oh,
go ahead.
Too fast.
Am I going too fast?
I'm gonna tell you why you're going too fast. Because
right.
I was in the group of 30 people that had tears in our eyes as you gave the valedictorian speech as a black man to Penn. So you gotta tell.
Okay.
That was a transformative moment for my life.
No, I appreciate that, brother.
Because I remember. So I'll tell the story.
You're gonna tell the story, okay?
So I'm talking my perspective of
your
the
version, right?
It was the first time I have been in a predominantly white educational institution at a major external event where a black man spoke his experience without tailoring it for a white audience.
Wow.
Because you've been in academia, you've seen, let me tell you how much I remember the speech, Josh. I remember you describing your mom and your sister as the intro to the speech and how their sacrifice got you that, as a grown man, I had tears in my eyes listening to that, because that was the first time I saw in academia, and I could do, this is in reflection, I didn't know it at the time, but in reflection, it was the first time I saw a black man in academia being unabashedly him and speaking unabashedly in our tones and our inflections and our ways. And I think everybody was happy, but Strivers Row and your whole group and me and your family, we were all like shouting and crying, and it was like almost birth, but it was amazing. So you can tell the story from your perspective.
That's so humbling, man. I mean, from my perspective, I had a nervous breakdown the day before, and my sister yoked me up like, you gotta do this. Because you gotta remember too, I mean, I don't know if we've spoken about this. I was the first black student in Penn's history to give the commencement speech.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they never had a black student give the speech before. And so part of the stress of that moment for me, and that means a lot to hear you say not only that it resonated with you, but that you felt like I was authentically myself in that moment, because that was important to me. That's always been important to me. If I'm in the space and my community's in the space, and South Yonkers is in the space, the Bronx is in the space, the Black church is in the space, spoken word is in the space, like that all has to come in wherever I enter, So for me, I was terrified though, because there's that burden of representation, right? You're the first black student to ever give this thing, you got to kill it. Or at least, that's the message in my head, that's the voice I'm hearing, right? So I gave that speech, that was fun. The year before that was actually, because you mentioned Barack Obama earlier, the year before that, my junior year, was actually when I've been invited to perform at the White House. So it was a pretty surreal 2 years in a row as a junior. And I think, was it my junior spring? Had to be, it was May. I think it was my junior spring I've been invited to the White House. So I was studying for finals when I got the phone call. So I ran out of my dorm, just like sprinted around the building. I was over the moon. And my mother was my plus one, so
wow.
Of course had to be,
so you took your mom to meet to the White House?
Yeah.
Wow.
She was she was on her Bronxian energy, heavy in there. Like after I performed, she ran up to Michelle Obama. She pushed her Secret Service out of the way and was like, "Have my son do. He killed it, right?" They had like a whole back and forth, So that was a dream, man, because it's that's what it's about for me. The PhD, the going to graduate school, the award, that stuff is so I can bring my mother to the White House, let her help her have that experience. So.
And I just really want to talk about intersectionality. Your book is about your grandmother being a sharecropper, right?
That's why I designed the cover art, and the book is dedicated to her. Yes.
So in 3 generations, you come from sharecropper to speaking.
Yeah. It's a blessing, man. You know, and my
Wow.
grandmother was alive for that, man. And
Your grandmother was alive, so oh my
yeah,
God.
yeah, man. She owned 3 salons in Harlem
Uh-huh.
before I was born. And I think she had around 2 when I was a little boy. So I would hang out in one of her salons, and all the older women, they would pay me $1 whenever I spelled a word that was longer than 3 syllables. You know, so recalcitrant, misanthropic, philosophical, loquacious. You know, and they would give me $1 for that, and that really helped hone my relationship to language. You know,
Wow.
it made a great difference. So she was incredible and a great poet. Would just spit sort of just poems off the top of her head. You know, Claude McKay, Paul Laurence Dunbar, just off the top when we would gather for Christmas at her house and what have 30, 40 people in this tiny apartment in the projects in South Bronx. But just glamorous, just a glamorous woman, imaginative, courageous. You know, and had a second grade education. Um, but was just full of love. You know, she loved us.
Wow. So you do UPenn. What
Yeah.
happens next?
Next, I go to England. So I won something called a Marshall Scholarship. I was also Penn's first Black Marshall Scholar, which is another sort of strange narrative of my life. Is that even though I'm 31 years old, at so many of these milestones in my life, I was being told that I was the first Black person to achieve something in the early 2000s, and it just sort of boggled my mind seeing firsthand the way that Black people have been barred from so many of these institutions and prestigious fellowships and things like this. So I won this thing called the Marshall Scholarship, which paid for me to go to England and study for a year. So I got a degree in theater and performance studies from the University of Warwick, which was transformational, man. Especially just linking with Black folk in England and learning about what their experience had been like, mostly for the West African and Caribbean folks, and who loved me, who took me in, who taught me a lot about um, just how to really think about these transatlantic relationships, especially as it pertains to art. I met some of my best friends over there to this day, so that was great. Started the Shriver's Row while I was in England via GChat with my older sister, Latoya. We were just talking one day. We were like, look, what if we started an agency to represent poets? Because the year before that, I had a video go viral and I'd been invited to go on the Monique show to perform. And the producer at the time asked if we didn't ask. He said that a band needed to be playing behind me because nobody would just want to pay attention to a spoken word poem a cappella on TV. And I said, I would prefer to do it without music. And he said, you can do it with the band or you can be the guy no one remembers, is what he said to me directly. And my sister just fucked up to him and he said, cut the band. So cut the band and we walk. And then just looked at me in the face. They cut the band. I had a good time. It was great. But in that moment, I
And they still
also
remember you.
realized, yeah, I was like, you're a hater. And I knew that as a 21-year-old man. Like, why would you say that to a young person? It was just such this strange moment where this guy was trying to overlord his status somehow as a producer on a talk show. But part of what that moment taught me was that artists need representation, man, and not just behind the scenes, but they need somebody to stick up for them in those difficult moments and say, look, we don't need this. We'll walk, we'll go to a gig somewhere else where they're not going to try to drown out your words and music. And so after that, I was like, Toya, what would it look like if we started a company where you did this for a number of different artists? So I went home, called a bunch of the homies at the time, and we started this thing called the Starvers Row, where for about 5 or 6 years we toured the world. We did international tours. We packed out concert venues. At times, had up to I think like 1,200 people in a venue for a poetry show, and it was incredible. It changed my life. And I started my PhD during that period as well, which I finished at Princeton in 2016. Was
Where
at
did you do
Harvard
your
for 3
PhD?
years, and now I'm a professor. Sorry, go ahead.
Where did you do your PhD?
I did my PhD at Princeton.
And where are you a professor now?
I'm a
Because I
professor at
think
Princeton.
people need to hear. I need like people to hear this because I need them to know that we have like people that are truly authentic in these spaces
Oh,
fighting
for
for
sure,
us.
for
So
sure.
so that's why I keep pulling it out of you because you're
Yeah.
very humble. There's some people that walk with their resume on their sleeve.
You got
You're
to carry
like,
on
I
them, brother.
graduated from college.
Boom. Princeton Tigers, baby. Stripes. Nah.
You're like I graduated from school and I went to another school and it was good, but
Nah, I appreciate that, man. I mean, but part of it for me too, though, is my parents always made sure that my self-worth was not derived, especially from predominantly white institutions, right? Like
wow.
right? Like their first thing was you are who you are because God says so. And you also are who you are because you're a Bennett. Like you come from our family, our family culture, our family tradition, our lineage. My children's books were a history book. You know, I had these picture books with Benjamin Banneker, Ida B. Wells, George Washington Carver, Harriet Tubman. So from a very young age, I was trained in the sense of myself that I came from a great tradition. So I should never feel insufficient. I should never feel insecure. I should never feel intellectually inferior to anyone. And I've been going to school with billionaires' children since I was very young, and never felt like I was less than anyone. One, because that'd be false, but also because I understood that even that feeling, should it arise, came from structural violence. You know, it didn't come from any fundamental truth about who I was or anything about Black people. So yeah, no, but I mean, I had a great time, in school, and I learned a lot at Princeton. I had incredible mentorship from people like the Black feminist theorist, Imam Perry, who has some incredible books out. Y'all should check out. Maybe Forever Stand, Vexy Thing, Looking for Lorraine. She just wrote a book about her son. It's called Breathe, which I would recommend. But working with people like Imani also just helped me realize, like you were saying, that I could be myself. And also that anywhere that wouldn't accept me, right, for who I was, I shouldn't even want to work there, right? This is the kind of question I was asking her when I went on the job market. I was thinking, should I cut my hair, right? Because my hair has been like this for a long time. My beard has been like this, and the hair on my head. And she was like, why would you want to work somewhere that needed you to cut your beard? That doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't even make sense. You are who you are.
Yeah.
Where do you see us going? We're almost at our time, and I'm going to impose on you. If there's some people that haven't heard you before. So if you could give us a short piece, but I want you, before you get there, to just sort of talk about where do you see us going as a culture, as a people. What do you say to young? There's a lot of young activists that are one generation behind you, that are in predominantly white spaces, that are dealing with the fights you're dealing with. So what would you say to them, and where do you see us going?
What would I say to them? Find your people wherever they are. They might not always look or sound the way you expect, but find people that love you enough to tell you the truth. Read as much as is possible. Eloquence and command over language is a superpower, right? And I think part of what my parents always told me to believe as well was that no one could take away what was in my head. So to the best of my ability, especially, it was clear very early on I was never going to be a superstar athlete, right? So I think my parents just put in my head, like, you need this, you got to rock out with this. And so that's what I would tell young people. Even if you are going to be a superstar athlete, make sure as well that you've honed your mind, that you've honed that muscle, that you invest in it. I would say, especially as it pertains to Black history, in a global sense, like learn who our people are and where they come from, because that will empower you every day. I would say whether or not you identify as a religious person, you need to have spiritual practices that strengthen you every single day, even if that's meditation, if that's reading religious texts, if that's listening to messages or engaging with books that make your spirit feel electrified and revitalized, right? Because we're not merely flesh and blood. Yeah, as a people, where are we going? On to freedom. That's my true sense. I think we're in a revolutionary moment where consciousness is shifting, right? Where people are realizing that the police, the prison system, that these are fundamentally anti-Black institutions that are not eternal, right? Same way that white supremacy is not eternal, right? It's several centuries old. But there was a world before white supremacy. There were Black worlds before white supremacy, Black societies, Black people, Black traditions. And that's important to know, that the current terms of order are not immortal, they're not immutable, and they're not permanent. So as a people, I see us going to a better place. Honestly, dare I say it, I think I see reparations on the horizon. I think that conversation now is at a point where we're going to keep pushing. and the abolition of prison and police. And that's my dream. That's a big part of it, to see our people free, and in community environments where they can truly flourish, right? Which will require the revitalization of every public institution we have. Our children will have to go to well-funded schools, right? We will need food that is healthy. We will need cleaner air, right? The highest asthma rates in the country are in the South Bronx, and that's not an accident, right? So it's a capacious environmental vision that we'll need, and I think we're prepared for it.
You know what? I know I asked you to give a piece, but can you
Yeah.
talk about some of the work you're trying to do in the inner city as far as teaching black youth about their literary history and some of the authors? Because there are people that are listening that they don't know. I'm in a mostly white environment, so they don't know who to read.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can go through some text. That'll probably be the most useful way
Yeah,
to
and
do it.
and also like, what are your and what's the how reading this stuff really helps people?
Mm. Well, how reading helps people. My goodness. I mean, that's
And
to me that's
reading
the
long
first.
form, not reading short form. I think we've mastered reading short
Oh,
form,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
reading long form, reading stories and things that are crafted and
yeah, yeah.
works and bodies of poetry.
Well, one, because I think you can't be a writer without being a reader. And I think writing is absolutely central to the human species in some ways, right? Like we write to express what we feel inside. We write, I think, to calm ourselves. I always have my students write first thing. And this is even when I teach classes in literary theory, when I teach classes on love or abolition or environmental theory. Everyone has to write a poem for the first 8 minutes on a theme that I just sort of throw out and they have to improvise, right? Part of that is that you need to have space where you can just write and think aloud with no boundaries, no borders, no one giving you a structure. That writing is the practice of freedom in some ways, right? So that's part of why writing is important, because it's a reminder, I think, that you're free and that you can create worlds on paper. Now, in terms of what I think you should read, uh, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, is on everyone's sort of, anti-racist reading list or reading list of the moment. But I do think Baldwin's work really illuminates for us what a socially responsible, not just socially conscious writer can do on the page. So I would suggest The Fire Next Time and No Name in the Street by James Baldwin. I would suggest How It Feels to Be Colored Me, which is an essay by Zora Neale Hurston. What else would I suggest? Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis? A very short book. You can find it online, especially her six chapter abolitionist alternatives. It's very instructive. I would suggest George Jackson's Soledad Brother. It's a book of letters, right, written by this brother who was a political prisoner in the 20th century, and to me, one of the most important revolutionaries of our time. What else would I suggest? Oh, and one more thing. A book called The New Abolitionist by Joy James, especially her introduction, Democracy in Captivity. It really outlines, I think, the structure of American political economy and how it's tied to the history of slavery. She writes about the 13th Amendment and said is it ensnares it as it emancipates, right? And I think that kind of understanding has to be fundamental to the way we move forward. So those are just some of the books and texts that I would suggest off the top of my head.
I'm gonna ask you a favor. I'll send you a text. If you
Yeah,
can text me like a list so I can
sure.
start sending it to my church and other young people,
Oh, wow.
because because I really want people to not to have real grounding in their perspective. And I
Yeah.
think like the works you're suggesting give us grounding and give us perspective. So can you give us one of your pieces, whatever you want to, whatever you feel is the appropriate one for this moment?
Yeah. Let me pull something up from my new book of poetry that's coming out in September. It's called Ode. And my father and I are actually on the cover of this thing, which is kind of surreal. I can send a picture to you later. Let me pull up Ode.
I'm just gonna bring you full screen so
Yeah,
that
sure.
everybody can.
You always are almost always only one in the room, maybe two. Three is a crowd. Three is a gang. Three is wow, there's so many of you. Three will get you confused with people that look nothing like you. You get called Devin or Sheila. Your name isn't Devin or Sheila. You do your best. not to ignore such casual erasure. You know silence will be taken as affirmation, praise even, and you always affirmative. You affirmative action, action figure. You fantastic first black friend. You first ballot quota keeper. You almost cry when your history professor says, you know, in this country, the gold standard used to be people. Funny how no one comes right out and says things like you people anymore. It's all code words like thug or diversity hire. You diversity all by yourself. You contain multitudes and are yet contained everywhere you go, confined, like there is always someone watching you and isn't there. And isn't that the entire point of this flesh you inherited, this unrepentant stain? Be twice as good, Mama says, as if what they have is worth your panic, worth measuring your very life against, and you always remember to measure your hair, your volume, your tone over email. You perpetually sorry. You don't know why. You apologize to no one in particular, just for being around and in your body at the same time. You know your body is the real problem. You monster. You beast of burden. You beast and burden. You horse but human. You centaur. You map the stars and pull back your bow to shoot the moon. And it's one good white eye. You are enough. You are wonderful. You are elegant. You are everything, your big sister said. And on your best days above ground, you believe her.
Wow. Somebody wants to say hi to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. It means a lot.
Josh, what's the name of that poem and when will it be out?
Yeah, so that poem is called Tokens of the Blues, and it's in my new collection, Ode, which is out with Penguin Books September 1st. So you can pre order it right now wherever books are sold.
That I think cap like I'm just listening to the words and that captures this moment and a certain segment of the black population in such amazing light. Again, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you,
Really,
brother.
really appreciate you. Everybody, thank you so much for watching the next Project Conversations. We will see you next Thursday. We have Olatunde. He runs Street Code, which is an amazing after school program in Silicon Valley. We're going to talk about how technology, community, and blackness meet and how coronavirus has redefining that moment. So thank you, everybody.